fourth year he's been in F1. He's shown certainly a level of talent that you would expect out of a young Red Bull driver. But I think the issue this year, once again, is going to be the performance of the car that's really prohibiting him from showing his true potential. Um, with the RBs and sort of with the likes of this new Stake Sauber F1 team, they were languishing at the back on in Saudi Arabia. Do you think that their underperformance is giving these sort of massive new sponsors a bit of a fright or a bit of a reality check?
Mm, I think, yeah, what that does it just creates a lot of extra pressure, which isn't necessarily needed on the drivers. I'd say diamonds are definitely made under pressure,
Mm.
but not in every case. I think only in the case of the Max Verstappens or the Lewis Hamiltons or the Charles Leclercs on the grid. And I think not everyone is like that. Every driver in F1 has to have some sort of capability because they are the 20 fastest drivers in the world. But within that 20, there is a big gap between first and last. It doesn't take away the fact that the last driver is fast, but I think it can have somewhat of an effect on them, just the publicity, especially in the rookie year and the beginning of their career, when they're building their way up and trying to find their own confidence.
I agree. I think that it's really important, certainly, for you to I think for a young driver, you're motivated by results, and those points that you gain, those every now and then, really give you motivation. And I think it's difficult to keep the younger drivers on side if you're not giving them or not, obviously not consistent, but if you're not giving them some level of success, because that makes it difficult for you start getting frustrated when you see your name, when you see 0 points next to your name, you start to think this doesn't reflect me. I'm too good for this, essentially. And this is what I think is the pitfall of some of the younger drivers that have entered the grid. But clearly, one of the younger drivers that has entered the grid has taken no such maturity issues on with him from whatever he may have had during his formative years, and that is Oscar Piastri, who I feel like we are perpetually talking about on this podcast because he is frankly just performing again and again. And this week, a sneaky fourth place. I feel like his fourth place and Fernando Alonso's fifth place really went undermentioned. Um, and not only was he in fourth, but he was also held up by Lewis Hamilton for a significant period of time throughout the race. Do you think that if it hadn't been for Hamilton's staunch defense, then he might have been able to maybe even try for the podium? I think it was 14 seconds off.
Yeah, I definitely think that Oscar Piastri has a lot of talent. I think we do seem to be talking about him quite a lot because I think he's definitely making a name for himself. He had one of the best rookie seasons I've seen in a long time, arguably better than um, George Russell and Lando Norris. I think, as much as it hurts to say, he has had the best rookie season I've seen in a long time.
And Charles Leclerc,
Um,
unfortunately, in
and Charles
2018.
Leclerc. Yeah,
Yeah.
but in terms of what he could have done on the racetrack on Sunday, I think I don't think he could have gone for a podium because if you look at the podium at the moment, what Max Verstappen, Perez, and Leclerc, that is, I think Oscar's just about reaching there. And I think even if Hamilton wasn't in the way, there still would have been a lot of work for him to do. And I think at this stage, the McLaren car needs to have a bit more development. But I think in terms of strategy, McLaren definitely did the best that they could, and I think a P4 is definitely the best McLaren could have done today with Oscar Piastri. In terms of Lando Norris, pretty disappointed that he only got eight. I think I'm not sure where he started, but I think it seems it seems like it wasn't too bad of a start. I'll be honest, Lando Norris' starts aren't the strongest I've seen.
Mhm.
I always find myself quite frustrated in the opening lap because I find that he's losing a couple of places. But I think he kept strong this weekend, and I think it was a decent weekend for the team.
Yeah, certainly wasn't helped by the fact that he false started on the grid, as pointed out by George Russell. But speaking of McLaren and maybe their sort of room for improvement, do you think that Hamilton's defense against Piastri was sort of partly, obviously, it was partly aided by Hamilton's phenomenal wheel work, but was there also a factor of maybe McLaren are lacking some straight line speed? And, on this fastest street circuit in the world, they couldn't get it done for a significant period of the race, and that may have held Piastri back. Do you think which areas do you think need improvement on that McLaren car?
Yeah, I mean, the McLaren car definitely has the potential to be faster than a Mercedes. I think you can look at last year where McLaren have outperformed and beaten Mercedes in terms of points. But I think um, in terms of this race weekend, it's the second race weekend of the year, and I think there's still much more development to be done. I'm not quite sure what factor that McLaren need to improve. I think I would like to say in general it would be the aero. I think all teams naturally struggle with that, and I think both the Mercedes and the McLaren car have the same power unit, and I think that's a potential limiting factor to the McLaren car performance. But other than that, I think you got to give it to Lewis Hamilton, his brilliant defense that race weekend. I don't think that the difference in the car's performance was the main factor. I think I'd like to give it to Lewis Hamilton defending there.
I think the Lewis Hamilton's defense was an absolute masterclass. I mean, we've seen him obviously, succumb to the defense of, for example, someone like Fernando Alonso a couple of years ago before. But I think we need to be reminded more often that Hamilton's talents are, lengthy, and he's proven that over many years. And I think when he's in the Mercedes nowadays, you sometimes forget how excellent of a driver he really is. And I think that certainly showed today. But Mercedes again, even though Hamilton's defense was excellent, could not convert that into more points than McLaren, with Oscar Piastri taking that fourth place. What does that do to a team when you have the same power unit in the back of your car and it has your name on it, but the person that you're selling it to is way up the road from you?
Yeah, I think that can be quite damaging to a team, especially I think we've seen this quite a bit with the Mercedes.
Mm.
I think
I
you don't
also
really see
think for
it
like
with
Red Bull and Renault, so that
yeah,
was obviously Red Bull was a
yeah,
partner of Renault, and they just absolutely in a league of their own against versus Renault. But yeah, sorry, continue.
exactly. Yeah, you're right, actually. Thank you for pointing that out. I wasn't thinking about that. I think you definitely have seen that with the Renault and the Red Bull back in the day. I think now the most common situation is a McLaren or an Aston Martin with a Mercedes power unit outperforming the Mercedes constructor. We saw it at the beginning of last year with the boom of Fernando Alonso, him getting podium after podium. That seemed brilliant for the Aston Martin, but painful for Mercedes. And I think it puts a lot more pressure on them. The other parts of their car, the aero and brakes and um, non-engine related parts. And I think that it can be damaging to the team seeing your customers outperform you. Um, Not sure what that can lead to politically. I don't really have a say in it, and I can't really think about what that would how that would affect the teams. But I can empathize with Toto Wolff having to have to go through that. But yeah, I think it's just an uncomfortable topic for a team like Mercedes.
Yeah, as you point out, both McLaren and Aston Martin outperforming Mercedes, certainly for the first half of last year, and also in this Grand Prix, with Fernando Alonso taking fifth in this race. Once again, sort of went under the radar a bit. Great top five finish from Fernando after the Aston Martin seemed to be a bit bogged down in Bahrain. But I thought the real interesting um, aspect of this race for Aston Martin was Fernando Alonso, fifth, Lance Stroll, DNF, clipped the inside of the wall as he did in free practice and spun out, and he was out of the race. This was a dynamic that we saw developing at the start of last year. Obviously, it died down a bit because the Astons were nowhere near the helm of the field at that point. Do you think it's going to be a direct, there's the relationship between Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin car and Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin car is going to be the same as it was next year? I mean, sorry, last year and this year.
I'm gonna say I don't think that the Aston Martin car was is built around Fernando Alonso like the Red Bull car is built around Max Verstappen. I think Fernando Alonso is a driver who is talented and can step into any car and perform if you give him the right car. Unlike his days at McLaren in the 2010s,
Mhm.
where he would be complaining a lot. I think the Aston Martin car shows strength and he can find that strength relatively easily and perform on the track. And I think Lance Stroll, he has a lot to live up to with having Fernando Alonso as a teammate. But I don't think he has much to lose given his position politically. But I definitely think Fernando Alonso is doing a really good job leading this Aston Martin team. I think his personality as well is pretty good, pretty funny and nice to have on a team like Aston Martin, where in recent years they haven't been as strong and they haven't been at the top. And I think it's sort of like new management having Fernando Alonso leading their team as their first driver.
I
So
think
yeah,
that's
I think it's yeah,
yeah,
great.
I think it's a really interesting point that you made there about, Fernando Alonso leading this team and, in a similar way to what we're seeing on the other end of the driver spectrum with Oscar Piastri is this sort of, maturity, and he's a wizened Formula One driver. And rather than bringing the sort of ego that he did to McLaren and to an extent Alpine, we're really seeing Fernando Alonso in his later years develop, I think, as a driver and as an extension of that as a person. Do you think that Fernando Alonso, if he was, for example, in the Ferrari or in the Red Bull, would be exerting a similar level of maturity, or would his drive for competition start to kick in and he would start to really get his elbows out?
Uh, that's an interesting question, actually. I think Fernando Alonso is a driver who definitely wants to win. I think at the moment he's in a position where his role is just to lead the team, and the car isn't in a position where they can be fighting for wins and championships. But I think if you put Fernando Alonso in a car which is at the top, like a Red Bull or a Ferrari, then he will fight. He will be he would definitely be up there. And like you said, he'll have his elbows out. And I don't think he's scared of Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc if he is to be put as a second driver. I think if he was to go to Red Bull, there would be a chance that he would be considered a second driver because Max Verstappen is untouchable at the moment. He is always going to be the first driver. But I think if anyone on the grid was to step into the Red Bull and have a decent chance, it would be Fernando Alonso because I think he just has that talent where if the car can perform, he will perform.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's what I think. I think he definitely has that confidence and he will show more of that competitiveness than maturity. Well, not maturity, but less relaxed and more on it. Like his like when he was in his prime.
Could he compete with Max Verstappen in a Red Bull right now? If you put him in the Red Bull number two seat, where would he be, do you think?
I think if it had to happen, the best time would be now. I
Mm.
think coming back in 2021 with Alpine after a break, I think that might not have been a good time. But after seeing the Red Bull perform, I think now would be the prime time to put Fernando Alonso in. And I think where he would be in terms of in the car, I think he would be um quite he would definitely be second. I think he would be performing closer to Max than Sergio Perez. I think because I think he just has a talent to step into a car that can perform. You've seen the Red Bull car perform, win championships the last 3 years, and there's that possibility, and Fernando Alonso will make it happen.
I mean, it's
Um,
difficult
but
because it's easy to
yeah,
say. You know, he's been in a car that's been at in the midfield at